Welcome to the worst man-made disasters in history, explained using Minecraft. Let's start off with the very bad disasters, and move our way up to the most catastrophic ones. Number 7. Piper Alpha Disaster. In 1973, oil was discovered in the North Sea off the coast of Aberdeen, Scotland. The British, being British, wasted no time and began construction of an oil platform named Piper Alpha to extract the oil, which was finished in less than 4 years. For many years after that, Piper Alpha operated smoothly with no major issues and made Great Britain tons of money. However, tragedy struck when the worst ever offshore oil and gas disaster happened on July 6, 1988, where a massive explosion and fire completely destroyed the platform, killing 165 of the men on board, as well as 2 rescuers. The fire was so ferocious that some surviving men had no choice but to jump 40 stories high into the ocean. Ouch, that must have really hurt. Although 61 workers escaped and survived, most of them sustained life-changing injuries and burns. The total financial loss was about £1.7 billion, making it one of the costliest man-made catastrophes ever. After a thorough investigation, this disaster was found to be caused by a lack of safety precautions and poor staff communication, as a staff member turned on a gas pump without knowing it was under maintenance. Occidental, the company that operates this oil platform, was blamed for inadequate maintenance and safety procedures, but no charges were brought against them, and I think we know the reason why. Number 6. Beirut Explosion. I'm sure most of you have heard of this when you're quarantined in your home during the pandemic. On August 4, 2020, an enormous explosion took place at the port of Beirut in the capital city of Lebanon, causing at least 218 deaths, 7,000 injuries, and $15 billion in property damage, while also leaving approximately 300,000 people homeless. The blast was so violent that it physically shook the entire country of Lebanon. It was also felt in Turkey and Syria, as well as parts of Europe, and can be heard in Cyprus, more than 240 kilometers away. Prior to the explosion, a fire broke out in a warehouse, and it first seemed like only fireworks were being burned. But at the same warehouse, 2,750 tons of highly explosive ammonium nitrate, which is equivalent to about 1.1 kilotons of TNT, had been stored without proper safety measures for the previous 6 years. Imagine storing fireworks and a megabomb in the same place. What could go wrong? During the aftermath, protests erupted all across Lebanon against the government for their negligence and failure to prevent the disaster, which led to the resignation of Prime Minister Hassan Diab and the Lebanese cabinet. Number 5. Tenerife Airport Disaster. Air travel might be one of the safer ways to travel, but when things go wrong, they can go really, really wrong. The deadliest aviation disaster ever recorded in history occurred on Tenerife Island in 1977. It involved a catastrophic runway collision between 2 Boeing 747 passenger airplanes, which resulted in 580 tragic deaths. Earlier on that day, a terrorist bombing in Las Palmas Airport caused many planes to be diverted to the small Los Rodeos Airport on the island of Tenerife, resulting in extreme congestion. Making matters worse, the airport at that time was covered with a dense fog, obstructing the visibility of the pilots and control tower. Moments before the disaster, KLM Flight 4805 initiated its takeoff at a runway when Pan Am Flight 1736 was taxiing at the same runway. As KLM's plane was accelerating, the pilots began to realize something was appearing in the fog, but it was too late to stop. The planes collided and both aircraft exploded into flames. All passengers and crew members aboard the KLM plane perished, and at least 330 people on the Pan Am plane died. Only 61 people, including the pilot, survived the impact and fire. The subsequent investigation by Spanish authorities determined that the primary cause of the accident was the KLM captain's decision to take off, under the mistaken assumption that a takeoff clearance from air traffic control had been granted. Number 4. Sinking of the Titanic. Before its first voyage, the Titanic was said to be unsinkable, which ended up being famous last words. On April 10, 1912, the giant ship set sail on its maiden voyage, journeying from Southampton to New York City. A few days later, the Titanic started to approach a zone known to have icebergs. There were 2 lookouts stationed in the crow's nest of the Titanic, and their job was made difficult as the ocean was abnormally calm that night, which made icebergs harder to spot. What's worse was that the crow's nest's binoculars were missing. Bruh. At roughly 11:40 p.m., a giant iceberg emerged from the darkness, and the bridge was quickly notified. The ship was immediately ordered to steer left and have the engines reversed. The Titanic began to turn, but it was too close to dodge the iceberg. The ship's side scraped along the iceberg, causing at least 5 of its supposedly watertight compartments to rupture, and water began gushing in. As the ship started to sink, the lifeboats began to be deployed, with orders of women and children first. However, there were only 20 boats that could fit around 1,200 people, around half of the total number of passengers. This issue was made worse by lifeboats being deployed well below capacity, because the crewmen feared that the boats would not be able to support a full load, and in the end, only 705 people were rescued in lifeboats. As the Titanic's front side continued to sink, the rear began to rise out of the water, placing tremendous strain on the midsection. It then snapped in two and sank to the bottom of the ocean, while hundreds of passengers and crew jumped into the icy water. Those in the lifeboats postponed heading back to pick up survivors out of fear of being swamped, and by the time they went back, almost all the people in the water had died from hypothermia, except for that one lady who was floating on a door. In the end, out of 2,200 passengers, a whopping 1,500 perished, making it one of the worst shipwreck disasters ever. Number 3. The Great Smog of London. Everything in Great Britain is great, isn't it? Well, definitely not the Great Smog of London, which was the worst ever air pollution event that took over London in December 1952. London's poor air quality has always been a problem since the 13th century, when many citizens switched from burning wood to coal. The air got even worse when the Industrial Revolution began in the 1700s, as huge amounts of coal were used to power factories. However, the Great Smog was unlike anything the city had ever faced before. A period of unusually cold weather that year led Londoners to burn much more coal than usual to keep themselves warm. While higher quality coals tended to be exported to pay off World War II debts, many people used a lower grade, sulfurous coal variety called nutty slack. I swear the British are weirdly creative in naming things. This kind of coal releases significantly more sulfur dioxide when it is combusted. Combined with an anticyclone and windless conditions, the accumulated airborne pollutants created a thick layer of smog over the city. The smog was so bad that it hindered visibility to only a few meters and even penetrated indoor areas, outclassing any previous smog events. Up to 4,000 people died as a direct result of the Great Smog, and 100,000 more were made ill by the smog's harm to the respiratory system. However, recent research reveals that the total number of casualties was considerably greater, with estimates of 12,000 deaths. The Clean Air Act was passed in 1956 to minimize air pollution, but the air quality in London still sucks to this day. Number 2. Bhopal Gas Leak. Also known as the Union Carbide Gas Leak, it occurred in 1984 at the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, and was considered the world's worst industrial disaster ever. Due to famines at the end of the 1970s, the demand for pesticides fell dramatically, resulting in declining revenue for the company. Struggling with tight finances, the company made many budget cuts, including a significant reduction in maintenance and safety training. The decline in standards of the plant kept on for many years, until on the night of December 2, 1984, a tank containing highly toxic gas, methyl isocyanate, burst open and leaked due to pressure buildup in the tank. The gas is directly released into the air and spread to over 500,000 people in the small towns around the plant. Thousands of people died immediately after exposure, triggering a panic as tens of thousands of others scrambled to flee Bhopal. The final death toll was estimated to be between 15,000 and 20,000, and about 500,000 survivors suffered respiratory problems, eye irritation or blindness, and other problems resulting from contact with the toxic gas. Investigations later determined that low standard operations and safety protocols at the understaffed plant had led to this disaster. To this day, a huge amount of industrial waste is still present on the site and was never cleaned up, which continues to poison the soil and water in the area. Because of this, the inhabitants continue to suffer chronic health problems like cancer and high instances of birth defects. Number 1. Chernobyl Disaster. One of the most famous man-made disasters ever, the Chernobyl disaster struck on April 26, 1986, involving the explosion and meltdown of the number 4 reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, situated near the city of Pripyat in Ukraine under the Soviet Union's reign. Prior to the accident, the plant staff wanted to test the steam turbine's ability to power the emergency feedwater pumps to cool the reactor in the event of a power outage or coolant pipe rupture. Wait, what if the pump doesn't work? The test was a success. Told you. However, they violated safety protocols, and this resulted in power surges in the reactor when they were shutting it down. The reactor exploded, causing a meltdown, which destroyed the containment building. This was followed by a reactor core fire that lasted for more than a week, which spread airborne radioactive pollutants throughout the USSR and Europe. In response to the accident, an exclusion zone with a radius of 30 kilometers was created, forcing 100,000 people to evacuate. An emergency operation to extinguish the fires and stabilize the reactor began, which led to 237 workers being hospitalized, of whom 134 developed symptoms of acute radiation, and 28 of them died within the following 3 months. Today, the area is devoid of human activity, and it is expected that it will be uninhabitable for the next 20,000 years. The Chernobyl disaster was the worst nuclear disaster and the costliest disaster in human history, with estimates ranging from $230 to $700 billion in losses, more than the net worth of Jeff Bezos, while the initial emergency response and subsequent mitigation efforts required more than 500,000 personnel. And that, kids, is why communism is bad.